Or missing texts. The Washington Post now reporting that text messages related to January 6th from Donald Trump's acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, and acting Deputy Secretary Ken Cuccinelli have vanished. Now, that is in addition to all those Secret Service text messages related to the 6th that have also gone missing. For an ostensibly apolitical organization like the Secret Service, this has become an enormous scandal. And it's the latest institution caught up in Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the will of the voters, to end American democracy. The January 6th committee has provided quite a bit of evidence showing that Trump wanted to use the Secret Service as a kind of personal armed guards, that he wanted to lead the mob personally to the Capitol during the insurrection in order to effectuate his coup, to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power and make that the final step and basically like crowning himself president again. And he wanted the Secret Service to help him. Now we know that Trump was aware of the fact that much of the mob was armed, because Trump apparently wanted the Secret Service to remove the metal detectors from his speech at the Ellipse, where he incited the riot.
Ms. Hutchinson, what we saw when those clips were playing were photos provided by the National Archives showing the president in the offstage tent before his speech on the Ellipse. You were in some of those photos as well. And I just want to confirm that that is when you heard the president say the people with weapons weren't there to hurt him and that he wanted the Secret Service to remove the magnetometers.
That's correct.
We also know the Secret Service tried to find a way to get Trump to the Capitol.
When the president said that he would be going to the Capitol during his speech on the Ellipse, the Secret Service scrambled to find a way for him to go. We know this from witnesses and the Secret Service, also from messages among staff on the President's National Security Council.
So the Secret Service ultimately decides that it could not comply with the ex-president's demands.
So once the president had gotten into the vehicle with Bobby, he thought that they were going up to the Capitol. And when Bobby had relayed to him, we don't have the assets to do it. It's not secure. We're going back to the West Wing. The president had very strong, a very angry response to that. Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing."
Okay, now, a few things about this. It's possible Secret Service, Bobby, who was a point man on that detail there, didn't want to go along with the disruption of the peaceful transfer of power, that they understood that they were essentially being used as kind of authoritarian guard for a would-be fascist. But it seems more likely that in that moment, the president's security simply could not envision a safe way to bring him to the middle of an armed insurrection, especially considering that there were already Secret Service agents, their own colleagues, who were on ground at the Capitol guarding the other protectee, Vice President Mike Pence, who was actively under siege from the armed mob chanting it wanted to hang him. And on top of that, we also know that Mark Short, Pence chief of staff, had warned the Secret Service on the 5th, called one of them into his office, that Trump might put his own vice president's security at risk.
The dispute between the president and the vice president had grown to the point where the vice president's chief of staff, Mark Short, was concerned that the president could, in Mr. Short's words, quote, lash out at the vice president on January 6th. In fact, Mr. Short was so concerned about it that he talked with the head of the vice president's Secret Service detail on January 5th. Here is Mr. Short.
Concern was for the vice president's security, and so I wanted to make sure the head of the vice president's Secret Service was aware that that likely, as these disagreements became more public, that the president would lash out in some way.
All this speaks, of course, to how central the Secret Service was to the full picture of Donald Trump's attempted coup. We know they were deeply involved in tracking and planning for both Trump and Pence during, before, and after the insurrection. But despite their centrality, it appears as though the January 6th committee knows surprisingly little about the Secret Service's internal deliberations from that time, what the agents were doing and saying. Last month, for example, committee member Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy of Florida said that Tony Ornato, who's a key figure because he served as both the deputy White House chief of staff for operations and as the head of Trump's Secret Service detail, that Ornato was not exactly forthcoming in his testimony to the committee, especially when compared to former Mark Meadows aide Cassidy Hutchinson.
Mr. Ornato did not have as clear of memories from this period of time as I would say Ms. Hutchinson did, if that's a fair assessment there. But we're always happy to have folks who have recalled things to come back and talk to us.
I mean, you can read between the lines there, right? They didn't get a lot out of Ornato. Now, the internal Secret Service communications leading up to and during that day on the 6th are possibly the most revealing pieces of contemporaneous evidence you could ask for. But of course, those text messages are, by all accounts, gone. As are the texts from, as we mentioned, Chad Wolf and Ken Cuccinelli. And there are basically two theories for what happened here. Either it was a cover-up. These messages were intentionally erased or wink, wink, nudge, nudge erased, were purposefully not archived properly. Now, that theory makes some sense in the broader context when you consider the black hole that seemed to consume much of the White House evidence that day. For instance, the missing call logs, no call logs, or the dismissal of the White House photographer. There were pains taken by certain people, Trump and others, to close down the information around what was happening on the 6th. That's one theory. The other theory that is just gross incompetence, which is essentially what the Secret Service is arguing. When it says the texts were accidentally erased as part of a system transfer. And for what it's worth, both Wolf and Cuccinelli say they did not erase any messages, that any missing evidence is, again, the result of an error by the Department of Homeland Security. Chris Krebs, who's a former Trump cybersecurity expert who worked at DHS, who was fired, quite notably, back in November 2020 by Trump for daring to say again and again the 2020 election was the most secure in history. Well, Chris Krebs came out yesterday endorsing the idea that the issue was with DHS and not individual actors. This is Krebs' take. He said, this is a DHS tech issue, not an individual official issue. DHS issues iPhones but can't centrally manage iMessage because they're encrypted on the device, and Apple makes it hard to access messages. Messaging should be disabled, which is what the White House does. So if all this is true, if the Krebs account is true, it's a massive screw up by DHS. I mean, retaining government documents is an incredibly important part of governing, particularly around the White House. Everyone who works around there knows it. So then you have to ask, well, how and why was it allowed to happen? And that brings us to a guy named Joseph Cuffari, who maybe you've heard of. He's the Inspector General for DHS. That's the person in charge of oversight for the agency. And to be honest, he's exactly the kind of oversight guy Donald Trump would want. First, he appears to be, habitually dishonest, much like his previous boss. For instance, his official government biography claimed he has a doctorate in philosophy, and he would sign his emails, Joseph V. Cuffari, PhD. Mother Jones found that Cuffari's PhD in management is from an unaccredited school known as the California Coast University, a school that's been investigated by the Government Accountability Office and was found to run a diploma mill where students essentially pay for a degree with little or no actual work required. But more particularly relevant is the fact that Cuffari seems entirely uninterested in doing any actual oversight. The Washington Post reports his office was regularly empty during work hours, even before the COVID pandemic. According to the House Oversight Committee, the Inspector General's office under him issued fewer reports in the first few months of 2020 than any point in the agency's tenure. So it comes as a little surprise that Congress is now saying Cuffari knew about the missing texts as early as last December, despite not telling Congress until this month. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney of New York, who chairs the Oversight Committee, and the January 6th committee chair Benny Thompson of Mississippi now both say they want Cuffari to step aside from the internal investigation into the missing messages. Whether or not he does, it's clear he oversaw the mishandling of what could be some of the most important evidence in the entire investigation into the January 6th attack on American democracy.